When you combine incredible craft with the power to back it up and speak intelligently about statistics and testing, like that is gold.
Welcome to Real Creative Leadership, a place where creative leaders can find insights and practical guidance on the day-to-day job of being a creative leader. We focus on real issues, topics, and insights of creativity in the business world. Join me as we explore the best strategies for developing your team, getting others to embrace your vision, and generating amazing experiences. This webinar series is produced by the Stoke Group. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, Adobe Executive Creative Director and author of Sorry Spock Emotions Drive Business. And this is Real Creative Leadership. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today on Real Creative Leadership. We have a special guest here today, Alex Amado, which is someone who I hold very dear to my heart because I've been working with him for a long time, for like the last 7 years. He took a big gamble on me, and so I'm super grateful for him to take a gamble on joining us on this show. But today's topic, we are excited to talk about, and this is something that's been, on my mind for a while, of where do you go beyond your traditional creative director or ECD or chief creative officer role? Like, it seems like in this industry, there are many of us in this creative field who just feel like we hit a ceiling. And is there any opportunity to move beyond that? And, we even did some research last fall with Real Creative Leadership and asked a lot of creative leaders out there, and we got mixed results. Some, say they like going back to the craft, some like just staying where they're at, and some were looking at new opportunities, but mostly it was around, being the CEO of some startup or a new idea, a new bigger business that you're starting on your own. But I want to talk more deeply about how do you have growth within either your company or your industry. So grateful to have Alex on board to talk about this interesting topic, and we're going to dig right into it. But first, let's pass over to Alex to give us a little background. Why don't you just tell us about, take a couple minutes and talk about where you come from, your journey, your personal experience, and then we'll get digging in more to this topic.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thank you, Adam, for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation. The way I usually describe my career is as incredibly non-linear. I've had a lot of various things that I've done. I've taken a lot of opportunities that frankly intimidated me at the time that I took them. And it turned out that in some cases I was able to completely crush it. And in other cases I was a miserable failure, but I learned from all of them. And really that was the heart of it. But I started out, and probably the reason that you've even asked me here is I started out when I was in high school. I was very determined that my career was, I was going to be a writer. I had like writer written all over me. My early email address was alex@writerboy.com, which I actually don't think I have anymore, and I probably should get that back. But I really wanted to be a writer since I was actually even younger than high school. I was writing stories, and I wanted to be a fiction writer. I went to Cal and got a degree in English literature, and had some sort of writing-oriented jobs. I did PR. I did some other marketing stuff that involved a lot of writing. And then in my very, very early 20s, right after college, I took a leap and said, I'm just going to go freelance writing. And I was a freelance writer for a number of years, three and a half, something like that. And I got to do a lot of really great stuff. I did some fiction, I published some comic books. I did a lot of marketing writing. I did ad copywriting. I did PR writing. I did ghostwriting for journalism and books and technical documents, all kinds of things that I was horribly unqualified for. And that was sort of my identity. And eventually what happened is, as happens to many people, is, that whole, I'm going to be a freelancer forever, I want that freedom. Ultimately, the tarnish starts to show up on that, and the bloom is off the rose, and it's sort of like, well, actually, more than that creative freedom, I'd really love, a steady paycheck and maybe some health insurance. And so I went after a number of years and actually got a real job, and I was working in leading a creative team, leading a writing team at that time in a small web agency, and this was back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and so. I did that and got a bigger experience actually working with many more clients. I'd worked with clients in PR, but working with a lot of clients in the web agency. This was the late 90s where, you know, everybody needed a website and web designers were in incredible demand. And did that for a number of years and grew my responsibility there. I got to take over other things. I started running writing. I took over all creative. I took over, or I should say was invited to take over. It sounds kind of hostile when I say it.
Yeah, you just took it.
The boss had no say, I just did it. I took over client relations and these were things that I found I liked and was reasonably good at. And then 2001, the dot-com bust happened, and literally overnight, half of our clients went out of business. And so after a year or so of struggle, so did our web agency, which was, you know, an incredibly painful but very resonant lesson in business and in the real stakes of business and you know, having to lay off, you know, the 15 or 20 people that I had hired and you know, handpicked and worked with in some cases for years. It was a learning experience. So I decided to go and kind of augment my business knowledge. I like to say I learned what I didn't know about running a business, which was most things. And so I went and was fortunate enough to get into a great business school, and I went and got an MBA to really augment and round out that business knowledge and set me up for the next phase of my career. And then that career ultimately led Adam to where you and I worked together, which is at Adobe, where I had a whole bunch of different roles over time, but ultimately the thing that I ran the longest, which was I think for 14 years, was the creative studio at Adobe. So the team that touches all of the marketing, all of the web, all of the creative output of that studio. And that gamble that I took on you, Adam, was an absolute winner. So I'm super happy that we did that. But we did that for a lot of years, running that studio, and the company grew from 3,000 employees to 25,000 employees and became a Fortune 500 and became a massive brand. And it has been a really great experience. But beyond just the creative team, which is wonderful and is still something that I really identify with, I got to run marketing strategy for B2B, marketing strategy for B2C, Adobe.com as a product, the technical side of Adobe.com. I got to run, what else did I get to run? Events, our corporate events. I got to run our performance marketing, which is a really quantitatively driven organization. I got to do all kinds of things that really broadened myself out to the extent that I almost did a double take, Adam, when you invited me to be on this. And I'm like, well, I'm not really a creative. And I was like, oh yeah, actually I was and I am in my core, but I've broadened my experience so much that I've gotten to do a whole lot of other things. So that's me in a nutshell.
That is perfect. And then just to absolutely put a pin on that, you did move beyond just a creative and running the creative team to many, many other big org, you know, structures and things that you were running. Like it was big time, like being a VP at a massive Fortune 500 company like Adobe is a huge accomplishment. So you are absolutely the good example for all of us as I'm looking to like, okay, who are people that have moved beyond just the creative realm into other things. So perfect. That's great background. Now everyone understands why you're on the show. You're the example that we're
including me.
Yeah, there you go. All right, let's back up a little bit because I want to dig into a few of the purposeful choices you made in your journey, because a lot of other creative people may want to move on to other jobs, but they're not doing the homework. They're not doing the work to be prepared for those other roles. So I want to back up even back to like grad school or some of the earlier choices you made when you went back to reinvent yourself before you said you took on new stuff. There were clearly skills that you had that leadership saw, okay, Alex has got this. Talk to me about some of those lessons and those skill gaps that you had to fill in before you had these opportunities.
Yeah, there were a whole lot of them. And I actually found that being a freelancer and being a, you know, starving artist, if you will, was incredible training for this, because if you end up in an agency, you get to just be a creative and you don't have to worry as much about client management, about cash flow, about where the next job sits, selling, how to present yourself, all of that stuff. You just focus on the craft, which you get much, much better at the craft. But as a freelancer for a number of years, I had to market myself. I had to pitch myself. I had to deal with collections from customers, clients who owed me money. I had to deal with my own cash flow. And, sometimes it was as simple as, how am I going to pay rent? But you sort of deal with a large world of things that don't come up as much in your professional career. And then the other thing that I was able to do, or in some ways forced to do, was I had a lot of other jobs as well. I would identify as a writer, but I took on whatever jobs that were reasonable and interesting and came my way. And so I did things like I ran a comic book convention for a number of years. Well, I just had to figure it out. I didn't have any experience in running a comic book convention, but I did have some experience in running small publications and things like that. And so I took on this thing and just learned and talked to people and interviewed people. I used my sort of journalistic skills to interrogate and pick up these skills. And I was a reasonably fast student, but all of those things gave me enough of a sort of chameleon background that I could really use my creative writing skills to emphasize or de-emphasize different things. So when I was looking for different kinds of jobs, I didn't always, and taking different kinds of opportunities, I didn't always start with, well, hey, I'm a writer, but I also have this other stuff. I said, well, yeah, I can write, but I'm a communication specialist. Or yes, I can actually create content, but actually the program management of that content and getting things delivered, or the organization of teams of people, like those are all things that I kind of picked up along the way and did it through both having the opportunity to take on out of the box roles, but also as a freelancer, the kind of nothing to lose, right? And this is so much harder if you're in an agency because you don't have the time, right? It's an all-consuming job. You don't have the time to say, hey, I'm going to spend 10 hours a week for the next 4 months doing something additional, or 20 hours or 40 hours. So that's a challenge, and that's where I got a lot of those kind of foundational skills, or maybe discovered them more than acquired them.
And I can imagine that we were talking before, you also talked about other skills like learning statistics. Like, talk to me a little bit about more of not just the skills you pick up in different experiences and different roles, but also some of the purposeful things that you had to study and learn in your MBA or another earlier classes on data that really shaped your growth.
Yeah. So when I went to Wharton to get my MBA, one of the things that had really struck me in my agency, my web agency experience, was how much I had to deal with numbers. And whether it was, budgets and burn rates, or it was this was a very, this was the 1990s. It was a very infantile period in web analytics, but people cared about clicks and conversions and hit counters. So I dealt with a lot of math, and one of the things that I really realized that I was very intentional about going into business school was I need to bolster my ability with numbers. I need to bolster my strength in being able to evaluate, analyze, and really understand numbers. And I was surprised at how incredibly useful that became. And in particular, statistics was something that I consume and use all day long in my professional career, even as a creative. This is a test and learn kind of culture, right? If you're in this for business and not just pure creativity, you have this obligation to make sure that your creative is impacting the business in positive ways. Lots of testing, lots of user research, and you need to know how to consume that and how to be a critic and a guide for those research people. So I am not a research professional, but I'm a very savvy consumer of their product, because what you can find is that if you don't ask the right questions and you don't know what all of those terms really mean, you can find that you are either being led to or inadvertently jumping to mistaken conclusion. And that by being a smart consumer of that data and making sure you're asking the right questions, you can really take your creative to the next level, because you really know what's going on. And it's always presented as numbers, charts, and graphs. And that was a very specific skill that has paid enormous dividends since business school.
And I think that the tendency for most creative people is to go back to that creative cave. Like we're used to, when we're being productive and doing a really good job, is to just kind of get in that state of flow and design something or write something, and you're just kind of like on your own and really focused on creativity. And I think you bring up this awesome point. Like you had to learn to love statistics. You had to learn to love math and other things. And I think typically in my experience, a lot of creatives will just, once you start talking numbers or finance, they're going to roll their eyes back and just be like, whatever, and stop listening. And I think that's a big, important note that we need to hit on right now, which is if you're going to move beyond that role, or you want to become quote unquote a true leader with a creative, bent, you need to understand and embrace numbers. You need to understand and embrace math. You need to clear those gaps, because the world beyond the cave is full of numbers. And you talked about how your job recently was a mix of math and creativity. So maybe talk more about why that's so important from your perspective, that if creative leaders need to move up, they need to understand all of that and data and math and everything.
So I think the cave is a place of comfort, and it is a warm, safe environment for those who are just focused on the craft. But if you're in the cave, by definition, you're not out on the hunting field, the battlefield, in the boardroom, right? You're hiding in the cave, and people in the cave don't get invited to the bigger meetings, just to be honest, because if you're in the cave and what you're worried about is the craft and the things that you bring to it from your experience and your mental model, you're not engaging with the business problems. And that, as you kind of rise up the ranks, that is 100% what everybody, our CEO at Adobe, all of his direct reports, yeah, they worry about their specialties, but really they worry about the business as a whole. It's not about, hey, is this good creative? It's about, is it doing what it needs to for the business? And that's true of any of them. I mean, all of those different types of leaders have their specialty, but they become broader and more broadly engaged and concerned about the business as a whole. And as I've grown up through the ranks, I've found that my focus has gone from much more around the functions that I run to the broader output of my extended team, which, when I was a VP at Adobe, was the entire marketing of the global organization. And I was very worried and engaged about that, and helped with, crafting strategies. And so you have to broaden out. The cave is not, is comfortable, but is not a growth space, right? You don't grow in the cave. I'd also say that when you combine unexpected skills, people, there's sort of a stereotype, right, of the creative in the cave who's just worried about the art and it's not beautiful anymore. When you combine incredible craft with the power to back it up and speak intelligently about statistics and testing, like there is nothing sexier than a creative who can sling data really easily and just sort of tell you not only why this is gorgeous and meets an aesthetic bar, but here's the 3 reasons that a business person is going to care about that this design is better than this other design. That is gold, and that is the space that the most effective creatives in my organization have always operated. But it takes time to get there, and it's not native to everybody.
That's interesting. There are a couple of interesting things you brought up. I was listening to a recent webinar from Northwestern where they brought in several people from the C-suite to ask them, what are some of the skills and things that you realize of people? Like, what does it take to move up to the C-suite? And they said the exact same thing as you, which is people keep coming at the C-suite with their discipline, thinking that that's all that matters. Like, I'm the creative, or I'm the PR person, or I'm the marketer person. And at the top, they don't care about that. What they want to do is you come to the table and let's talk business problems and business results, and be able to speak that language. And then, oh, by the way, bring your discipline in when it's needed. So when you mentioned that, I think that's a critical point to hit on for everyone here is don't go run into the boardroom table saying, beautiful art here and great, pros there. Like, just don't start there. Start with an understanding of business and then move down. Alex, you had a really cool quote that you said before that totally hits on that, which is this idea of the biggest job of the CMO is to represent marketing to non-marketers. So it totally lines up with that. Like, if you're wanting to move up to whether it's a CMO or chief data or digital officer or whatever it may be, your job is to talk to other business people, operations people, finance people, people at the top in a way that they get marketing without any background, right?
One of the things that's interesting is that as you kind of go up levels in an organization, in the early stages of your career, you're proving yourself by showing and demonstrating your skill in your particular discipline. I'm a great writer. Let me show you all the stuff I've written and the problems I've solved. I'm a great designer. I'm a great video editor, whatever. As you rise in the ranks, it becomes much more about that becomes taken for granted. Like you wouldn't be the vice president of, the creative team at a company like Adobe if you weren't great. So we know that. We don't care about that. That's not what you're here for. What you're here for is to bring that lens onto the business. And we're all there having a business conversation about strategically, what are we going to do? What's the marketing angle that we're going to do? When Anne's in, when my boss Ann Lunas is in the executive staff with the CEO and her other leaders, 95% of the conversation is about decisions that the business needs to make. How do we drive the business? And then she's got the angle and action around what is marketing going to do to support and drive and bring unique value to that. But it's a conversation driving what Adobe is going to do as an enterprise, not about what, she doesn't just talk about marketing. She's a business leader. And that's an evolution that I've gotten to see several of the steps along the ladder and how it really changes.
Well, the next thing I want to talk about is, so we've talked a lot about a skill gap of, if you want to move up, you've got to get the right skills, speaking the right language, understanding to reading the room, all of those great things. But there's also this perception gap that we talked about. And a lot of times it's our own fault as creatives where we put on this rock star persona of like wearing the cool, crazy clothes and the crazy hair and walking in and talking like a surfer, right? Like there's certainly a persona around creatives that isn't doing us any good at that level. So talk to me about that perception gap and how you fix that perception gap at a leadership level.
Yeah, I actually did. I will confess here, possibly for the first time on tape, that I did go through a phase where, probably a multi-year phase, primarily at the agency, where I wore all black.
Of course, we all do. We all do.
But that's not the heart of the perception gap. And I think the perception gap doesn't really have to do, especially these days, maybe it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but it has much less to do with presentation and much more to do like visual presentation. And I think we're getting better at that as a society and more conscious that it doesn't matter how you look, it is much more what you bring to the table, but it's how you frame the conversation. And it kind of goes back to, are you a business leader talking business strategy, business outcomes, business tactics, or are you a creative who kind of pigeonholes him or herself by just bringing the creative angle and not thinking about the larger context and impact on the business? It really has to do with both learning their lingo, but also engaging with their problems and doing the translation in your head of what that means from a creative point of view. You don't have to share that because to some extent, they're like, you as a creative leader, your peers are like, you've got the creative covered. I'm confident you're going to make the creative great. Now let's talk about the business problem that we're all solving together, and then we'll go do our pieces of it and make sure that it connects. So I think it's really about the framing of the problem and how broadly you can envision those solutions and engage with the problem. And that's something that I think creative people, creative artists have as an incredible superpower. Is creativity is what solves 100% of the world's problems, whether they're engineering problems, strategic problems, infrastructure, supply chain problems, whatever kind of problems, the creativity is what solves them. But we have to broaden creativity from the craft of moving words and pixels into specific configurations to using that out of the box thinking that is taught and is incredibly powerful in the creative community, and using that force for bigger thinking and bigger ideas that are going to impact the business and not just the creative output. I think that's the reframing that we have to do. And that superpower is so latent but ready to be tapped. It is it's amazing when you think about it.
That's been a big discussion over the last little while, especially as we've been working through some of our brand problems. But it's like in business, the word creativity sometimes is seen as like not business essential, not real, not helpful. But when you think about creativity in terms of that ability to zig or zag or pivot or try something new or look at problems in different ways, and if you really take on that mantle of capital C creativity, where like everyone is creative, every human is creative, and really engage on that, I think that's where big things can happen in business. And you got to move beyond, you're right, pixels and letters. Like that's a huge deal.
I think we get tripped up by the language. And I think we would do ourselves a favor if we, as creative, capital C creative, humans, separated the craft of creative output, design, copy, video, those that craft. If we separated that from the creative thinking that we bring to the problem solving. And it's funny, no other team has this problem. There are incredibly creative people in PR. There are incredibly creative people in media strategy, and they don't have the problem that they get pigeonholed by that creative, that C word. In fact, they're, rewarded when they show creativity. And somehow creatives are bound by this word that is both the description of their job and their team, as well as the thing that they need to bring to the table, but in a different context.
Oh, I love that. It's our own fault. It's our own fault that we're holding ourselves back. There's some truth there.
It's our opportunity. It's not our fault, but it's our opportunity to reframe the language and say, yeah, there's the design stuff. Design is great. We can do design all day long, but let's find creative solutions to business problems. That's the thing that an army of creatives can bring to, unleash the next wave of business revolution.
I love that.
That sounded very militant when I said
that. We're not going to.
It wasn't like a seize the means of production kind of call to action or anything.
Improve the world. Let's go to the positives. We're going to improve the world with positive experiences. Well, digging back a little bit more into this perception gap, I think there's something else that you and I talked about earlier, which is there's also this perception that in marketing leaders make decisions, and they have been trained to make decisions, whereas maybe someone from an agency who just swoops in, helps on a project and goes out, or someone in the creative department who's not used to making the decisions, traditionally, that's part of that gap of moving up and trying new roles is like, do they understand the severity of all this? Can they make business decisions? Can they figure that out? So talk to me a little bit more about that topic and how we can fix that gap.
For me, the context of this is, how do leaders in agencies shift over to become leaders on the client side and bring and get sort of similar or higher levels of respect and status. And I think part of the challenge is that sort of inside outside perspective, where when you're in a brand looking at your agency, you tend to think of them, and I think this is an immature way of thinking of them, but it is very common. You tend to think of them as the group that either you tell them what to do, or they come up with some crazy ideas that you might like a few of, but that ultimately that agency is not really accountable in the same way that you're accountable, because you're the one spending millions of dollars. You're the one, the CEO or the head of revenue officer is going to go, yell at if we don't make our marketing contribution to sales, et cetera, et cetera. There's a perception of a lack of accountability on the agency side to the client side. Like, your accountability is to get stuff done that you commit to get done, and it's not to impact the business. Like, we'll just, move on to another agency, whatever. There's not that long-term committed relationship. And I think that can be a challenge. And even inside organizations, I think it's way too common that creative teams in particular are pigeonholed as being agency-like, as opposed to critical decision-making, accountable parts of the organization. And it's something that I struggled with and very intentionally changed as part of the culture at Adobe over many years. Was we were not the creative service bureau. We were the brand stewards and creative oversight of everything that the company did. I think a lot of brands make a huge mistake in having their internal creative teams be set up in competition to agencies.
Yeah.
One of the things that I did really early on at Adobe was I had our agencies work primarily through our creative studio. So everything goes through the internal creative team, and then we may do it in-house or we may do it through an agency, but it's all going through that same set of creative filters, brand appropriate filters, and it enables and empowers the team to be more deliberative, more strategic. It pushes them up into a higher level of conversation as opposed to really just being the at the whim of a client, if you will. I think it gives them much more of a stake at the table, because when you're internal, the client can't fire you if everything is going through your team, and that's, I think, a powerful place to be. So I do think it's important that creative organizations have that accountability and are long-term partners with their business partners, rather than just being a creative service bureau or a somewhat disposable agency, who's going to come up with ideas and not really have accountability for the impact of those ideas.
Oh, I'm a huge advocate of that. Like I will be preaching that same story along with you for a long time, that, more businesses, more brands need to split off. So it's not like, creative is just a subset of the marketing team, but strategic partners with the marketing team, and not a service agency. But that said, we've also been talking about, as you move up in your career, you only hit a ceiling so far of creative. So people hear the word, you have to, the word marketer, and it sounds like a dirty word, like for a creative, like you don't want to become a marketer if you keep moving up. But talk to me more about, like, in your experience, it sounded like you had to take on the mantle of marketer and creative in order to have that platform and that ability to use creativity for good. But you just have to get over that, the word, or just the thought of becoming a marketer, and it's okay. Like, it's greater capital C creativity, right? So talk to me more about that.
Yeah, I think, so it makes me reflect a little. Adobe did a study probably 10, 11 years ago now, around perceptions of marketing. And I think marketing has a similar type of branding problem. They have a reputational challenge in the same way that that kind of creatives do, or in a similar way to how creatives have a reputational problem. We did a study that showed we did a study of business people of all levels across the US and internationally, and it showed that the relative we asked people to rank in order of sort of respect, like different positions inside an organization, like, and different types of profession. And so, CEOs, lots of respect, financial leaders and accountants, lots of respect. At the bottom end of the scale were car salesmen, insurance salesmen, and marketers, which really hurt. Now, I think marketing has really, for the last 10 to 15 years, been really changing our perception and our opportunity in organizations. And the way we do it is through accountability. Marketing 20 years ago. So, I ran agencies and I did marketing copy actually 30 years ago, because I'm really old. It was very loose with its data, right? We used to make campaigns and it was a lot more instinct and a lot less data, because we didn't have data. Nothing was digital. And we'd help create a campaign for a client, and then we'd launch it and we'd wait. And maybe 3 months later, we'd do a survey and hope. It felt like rolling the dice every time. You hope that something great had happened and that no exogenous factors had come in and screwed everything up. And sometimes it won and sometimes it didn't, but it was much more a game of persuasion than a game of data. And now marketing is incredibly accountable. I mentioned earlier, I ran the performance marketing organization. We had a multi-$100 million quarterly target that we needed to hit. And I was sitting in front of the CEO and the leaders of the business, justifying on a weekly basis why we didn't, or just barely hit that number. Like, that was an incredibly accountable position. There was no storytelling that got you off the hook. it was real data showing the impact of marketing. That's a fantastic place for marketing to be. And that's how that accountability is what every business peer wants, because the CEO is accountable for the business no matter what. And he wants that accountability at every layer down the business, and they want that accountability. And that's how creatives need to think about this broader obligation to the business, and marketers do as well. If you get to the point of accountability, you're going to be successful in the business.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I guess as I was thinking about all this, so clearly, marketing is not a bad word. We got to get it away from the used car salesman.
I think we've since climbed up in the ranks.
Oh, good.
We're not quite at firemen yet, but we're getting there, right?
Yeah. Well, they're heroes. We're not. Let's be honest.
Not yet.
That's fair. Well, the other thought that I had is, like, as we've been talking about, okay, career paths and where you can go as a creative and where's your ceiling and where's not, like, clearly moving up to a creative leader's boss is the CMO, like that's the path. But maybe I would just ask the most important question is that the right path for many of us? Maybe not. Like, I think there's got to be some introspective thought of, like, do I want to go into more of a digital thing? Do I want to become more of a marketer? Do I want to start my own thing and be a CEO? Whatever. I think that's awesome. But maybe just tell us, like, what other advice do you have for people who are, a creative leader who wants to grow? What are things that you would say, here's some things to try, here's some things to do, and some things to consider?
So I think that there are a lot of adjacencies and very logical places for creatives to go. Finance is probably not one of them, but there are a lot of places available. So obviously marketing thrives on creativity. Marketing doesn't exist without design output as as one of its kind of core elements. So that's a natural adjacency. And if you've done a good job as a creative, a marketing supporting creative, you will have a good insight into what the levers, what the needs, what the opportunities are in those kind of marketing adjacent spaces. So that is an obvious one, but I also think of things like product. Product is especially in this digital world, product is very much about the design, and a lot of marketing now actually resolves in product. If we look at marketing, kind of any service or subscription, it's a continuous journey for the customer from the marketing surfaces to the transactional and commerce surface to the actual product. So I think those lines have blurred in a way that used to be much more divided. You could easily go from being a great marketing organization designer, to being a great product designer. I think that there are good connections there. And you can also go into a lot of these digital accountable roles as well, if you've embraced that idea of statistics, numbers, and accountability. If you've done that work and you're I think of examples like really strong web creative leaders, right? They're on the hook for the numbers because there's no way their stakeholders let them off the hook for the numbers. Web is a data-driven creative practice these days. You could flip the script on that and become a data-driven leader of a digital property and those digital outcomes, like a revenue driver, and just use your creative output or your creative experience as a way to partner with a creative team who's doing that work while you take on those other challenges of infrastructure and audience and the broader strategy over time. I think there are a lot of really good paths for creative people because, like I said, those creative skills, that thinking out of the box, that ability to find non-obvious solutions that can be really powerful in design, they can be equally powerful in business. And I think there are very few limits to what creatives could do as a leadership role.
Oh, that is awesome. And that is a perfect place to end. Anyone listening here today, I hope you've gathered there's so much good real world experience from Alex here as he's moved up the chain and taken on, greater leadership roles. So much to learn, so much to dig into, and some amazing advice. So thank you for joining us here today and giving everyone at least some hope of some things to think about and where we can, push in our careers and try different things and embrace, adjacent jobs or roles or anything else to help us move along. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's my total pleasure. And if there was one last piece of advice, I would say take the uncomfortable leap. Do something that is out of your comfort zone, and win or fail, you will absolutely learn, and it'll give you a set of experiences that'll help you figure out where to go next. So take those risks.
No, that's great. I love it. All right, Alex, how can people find you, or where can they follow you?
So I'm LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I am most often active. It's Alex Amado at LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening and joining us here today. As always, you can find us at realcreativeleadership.com. You can find me at adamwmorgan.com. Thestokegroup.com is where you can get help from if you need to scale or get some more creative juices into your flow. They're an awesome partner in making this happen. So all the different ways that you can reach us. And the big ask at the end here is it's just to get involved with us. We would really appreciate it. Go out there, share this content with others of all the advice that Alex has given you. And I think, more and more we'll have more growth with creative leaders, and we'll start to have a bigger impact on business. So we appreciate everyone listening in. Have a great time. We'll see you. Thanks for listening to Real Creative Leadership. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, and this series was brought to you by the Stoke Group. For the most effective marketing, use both sides of your brain to align your strategy, creative execution, and analysis. Connect with the Stoke Group for help designing each step of your marketing plan and creating a coherent vision. Visit thestokegroup.com to learn more.